So the trans athletes in sports issue continues to be one that confounds me as the science is very obvious and the results are very obvious that trans female athletes, meaning transitioning from male to female, retain a great deal of their advantage when competing in sports. The science is clear on this. I've read all of it, including the stuff that you have to pay to read. I did two videos on this topic, and it was so contentious. It's literally the only thing that I've ever done wherein I was doxxed and got death threats for exposing the truth about. But the IOC seems to be going in the opposite direction with this that it should be. Um, so here we have it. The IOC, which determines the rules for the Olympics, has just determined now that uh, testosterone levels won't determine an athlete's eligibility. And even as I demonstrated previously, the science has already shown that even after 2 years of inhibiting testosterone, that trans athletes were still retaining their advantage if they went through puberty as a biological male. Let's listen to this clip from an NPR podcast.
The IOC this week announced new, more inclusive guidelines to determine whether elite transgender and intersex athletes are eligible to compete in the Olympics. Advocates for more inclusivity call this a win. Critics say it's a loss for science. Here's NPR's Tom Goldman.
The IOC is offering guidance, not rules, based on 10 principles. The first one listed is inclusion, and it says everyone, regardless of their gender identity, expression, and/or sex variations, should be able to participate in sports safely and without prejudice. Those are welcome words to Chris Mosier. He's a Team USA transgender male athlete and the founder of transathlete.com.
What is great about this is it's really a shift to human rights.
But critics say a shift away from science, specifically the science of the male hormone testosterone. In recent years, the IOC has required elite transgender female and intersex athletes to suppress naturally high testosterone levels in order to compete in women's sport. The new guidance changes course. It says there should be no presumption that trans female athletes have a natural advantage over cisgender women. And those are unwelcome words to Joanna Harper. She's a transgender female and a former competitive athlete who now researches transgender sports.
Look, inclusion's a wonderful thing. However, I don't think that it should come at the cost of denying the obvious fact that testosterone is important in athletic performance.
In 2015, Harper published the first paper on transgender athletes, and she helped the IOC craft its earlier policy requiring hormone therapy for trans female athletes. That still could happen since the new guidance leaves it up to individual sports to make their own rules. The IOC plans workshops for sports federations and athletes starting after the upcoming Winter Olympics in February. Tom Goldman, NPR News.
So it's good to hear that there are people on both sides of this issue who happen to be trans who get it. And some of the fans that I got specifically who were trans athletes or just trans women in general came forward quietly and privately to tell me that they really appreciated what I was doing. But there are a lot of people who get extremely upset if you tell the truth about this. And this is really no, exception to that. But, Guardian did a video, not a video, an article about this. And I had used some of the previous Guardian articles in my first video about it, but the framework says no presumption of advantage. Burden is placed on individual sports to decide their own rules. So they're just going to ask the individual sports to go on and regulate this, which is kind of passing the buck. But there are still trans activists in this situation who will tell you that there is no scientific evidence, that there is no advantage, et cetera, et cetera. And frequently they would say, well, they have to reduce their testosterone. Well, now they don't. So, what next? And as I'd always pointed out before, it didn't really make any difference because a lot of the athletes, specifically on the high school level, were not even required to take the hormones anyway. And particularly in track and field, as I revealed in some of my previous videos, you can see the difference because even the high school boys' records destroy the Olympic women's records. So this is taken directly from their guidelines. 5. No presumption of advantage. No athlete should be precluded from competing or excluded from competition on the exclusive ground of an unverified, alleged, or perceived unfair competitive advantage due to their sex variations, physical appearance, and/or transgender status. Until evidence per Principle 6 determines the otherwise, athletes should not be deemed to have an unfair or disproportionate competitive advantage due to their sex variations, physical appearance, and/or transgender status. Now, this evidence-based approach is funny because I was reading an opinion column on The Hill about this from a trans athlete who was saying that this is problematic. We shouldn't, create an evidence-based approach. How dare we do that, right? But anyway, any restrictions arising from eligibility criteria should be based on robust and peer-reviewed research that A, demonstrates a consistent, unfair, disproportionate competitive advantage in the performance and or unpreventable risk to the physical safety of other athletes. B, is largely based on data collected from a demographic group that is consistent in gender and athletic engagement with the group that the eligibility criteria aim to regulate. And C, demonstrates that such disproportionate competitive advantage and or unpreventable risk exists for the specific sport, discipline, and event that the eligibility criteria aim to regulate. So basically, they want to have more evidence, even though we have the evidence. And it's been long established that testosterone has, athletic benefits. I mean, you see it all the time. That's the reason why testosterone is banned, as far as testosterone enhancement anyway, is banned in professional sports. It's the reason why the Soviet Union would give their women testosterone because it would pass through the doping, tests. It's just absurd. And meanwhile, over in the NCAA, the organizing body for college sports, they just, again, follow the same rules. So Fury, as a transgender UPenn swimmer, 22, who used to compete as a man, smashes 2 U.S. women's records in weekend competition and finishes one race 38 seconds ahead of her nearest rival. Lia Thomas, 22, smashed 2 U.S. swimming records at an Akron, Ohio contest. Thomas won the 1,650 freestyle in a record time, her closest rival beating her by 38 seconds. She left rivals floundering in a 500 freestyle, beating them by 14 seconds. Last month, she competed in a women's swimming event between Princeton and Cornell and has regularly broken records as part of UPenn's team. Thomas previously competed for the school's men's team for 3 years before joining the women's team. Her last men's competition was in November 2019. Some have voiced their anger at her swimming success, claiming it to be unfair, and many refuse to refer to her as a woman. NCAA rules dictate any trans female athlete can take part in the women's events if they have completed a year of testosterone suppression treatment. So this is, again, somebody who's on the testosterone suppression, which was already proven not to be sufficient. So, she still blew them all out of the water. 38 seconds is absurd in swimming. I mean, that's a long time to get ahead of somebody and just be sitting at the bar waiting for them to catch up to you. It's just ridiculous that we're still doing this and acting like this is okay. And the people that don't like it are basically told to be quiet about it because these colleges have become total havens for insane levels of wokeness. And in one of the articles that I read, where a trans athlete is, of course, advocating for their own participation, they openly said that it would, of course, take years to be able to compile, probably 10 plus years to compile the sufficient, evidence as far as they're concerned that would allow them to say, okay, well, there's very obviously an advantage. Let's take a look at this video. So we got to pay attention to this lane here. Starting to push ahead. And back around. I'm going to clip part of this to get to the end because it goes on for quite a while. They even fast forward it themselves. So here she is. Bang, first place. Now, watch how long it takes for the others to catch up. Nope, they're not finishing yet. They've all still got to bound back, which means she lapped them. Still sitting there by herself at the finish line. And still sitting there by herself at the finish line. And there comes second place. Bang. That's how long it took for everybody to catch up. So here's another example. This is a track event where Selena Sol, who's one of the activists about this issue in track and field, meaning she's actually on the pro trans athletes should not just be allowed to compete in women's sports, along with Alana Smith, who was another girl who came out, both getting beaten here um, by the trans athlete and by a really large margin. Let's go ahead and take a look at it.
Terry Miller of Bloomfield in 5, the overwhelming favorite. Alana Smith is in 6, Emily Mulhern in 7, Selena Sewell in 8, Megan Wasik in 9, and as expected, it is Miller and then Smith.
Oof. 11.64.
She just broke her own state open record.
Yikes.
So at the state championships, broke their own record. Somehow that's okay. Don't get it. Let's take another one.
Out of the 100 is in lane 5. Chelsea Mitchell in lane 6. Mitchell ended up the 100-meter champion after the false start. Nichelle Smith in 7. Carly Swirebutt in 8. Jillian Mars second in the 400 is in 9. Here comes Terry Miller. Miller, after the false start in the 1, takes the 200.
Gonna be 24 low.
Out.
So again, clear, obvious examples that this is not right. And it's happening everywhere now. It's just a matter of time. It's not huge yet, but you can imagine that this sort of thing is only going to get worse over time. Particularly because we're not allowed to discuss the truth about what's going on. We're supposed to all shut up about it. There are 2, at least as of now, University of Pennsylvania swimmers who have spoken anonymously to the media because they've been told not to speak publicly on this issue. And I'm pretty sure there's just going to be more, especially as the swimmer just goes to more and more competitions, breaks more and more records. And again, this is just an example of just sheer insanity. If you guys haven't watched my previous videos on this topic, you really should. The second one is a bit more brainy because I got targeted, by the trans community for not using enough science. So I went and read all of the science into my video, and I have all the receipts. And people are starting to wake up, but at the same time, this kind of nonsense is going on. I did another video about Mac Beggs, the trans female wrestler, who recently, like around the time of their graduation in high school, did not want their wrestling accomplishments mentioned because they didn't feel that they deserved them, because they knew they had an unfair advantage. That video is also on my channel. So thanks for listening, guys. I'm going to keep, monitoring this situation and seeing how it develops, and we'll see where it goes next. I feel sorry for girls for the next, several years, because I don't think that they're going to, if they're not happy with the science that already existed, I'm curious, I guess this is what I wanted to get at was, this is the kind of genie that after you let it out of the bottle, it's not going to be easy to put back in, especially with the weird woke culture stuff that's going on. If we just continue to allow this sort of thing, it's only going to get worse. It's going to get deeper and deeper embedded into the situation, into the societal understandings of the situation. And, I don't know what'll come out of it. I guess I'm glad now that my daughter's no longer an athlete. Thanks again, guys. And tonight I'll be interviewing Nathan DeBruin at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. He's the on the spectrum photographer who was an awesome witness in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. Thanks again.